So this is one of the OpenChain webinars designed to help educate people and inform them about different things happening in the ecosystem related to open source, license compliance, risk management, security assurance, and so on. As our regular viewers will know, we're focused largely on how in the supply chain we can ensure that the choices made by companies are as stable, reliable, and efficient as possible. Sometimes that involves adopting our ISO standards, such as ISO 5230 for open source license compliance, or ISO 18974 for open source security assurance. In some cases, people are looking for reference material, they're looking for information about regulations, and so on. Our webinars cover all of these topics. However, today, the focus is very much on ISO 5230, the international standard for open source license compliance and process management. In the case of this particular webinar, we're very fortunate to have an organization, IAV, which has undergone third-party certification for ISO 5230. The certifier of that party, so TimeToAct, which is an official OpenChain partner, and of course ourselves. So we have a broad audience of people with expertise in this domain ready to help out. And this case study is responsive to quite a lot of inquiries and demand across our community regarding examples of how companies do various things. So in recent times, last few months, we've had BlackBerry talk about how they self-certified around ISO 5230. We've had the Open Euler operating system ecosystem talk about how they self-certified on ISO 18974. And today with third-party certification on 5230, we're filling out the case study portfolio for the year. Before we get started, we always show our antitrust policy notice, and you can find the full antitrust policy on the Linux Foundation website. As always, if you're from a member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andrew Updegrove. If you're not from a Linux Foundation member company and you have any questions, do ask your own legal counsel. But the short version is that the antitrust policy is to ensure that everyone is comfortable speaking and sharing in this meeting. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speakers with the small note that, as always, this is an OpenChain webinar, and that means whether you're watching it through our LFX Zoom or, for example, you're taking part via this stream into the Chinese systems, you're very welcome to ask questions at any point. Just raise your hand or type it in the chat. And of course, at the end, we'll have a space as well for questions to be raised. Now, I will hand over to our coordinator of the actual presentation, Simon from TimeToAct, to introduce the parties presenting and to help people understand what's going on. Simon, I'll hand over to you and stop my own screen share now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Shane. As you stopped your screen sharing, let me start with mine, please. Here we go. Perfect. You should be able now to see my presentation.
Yes, it's streaming perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. Cool. So, Shane, thank you very much for the introduction and also providing us the platform actually to present our approach of the third-party ISO 5230 certification. Yeah, we want to share with the community how IAV actually has achieved the official third-party certification. With me in this webinar, actually, we have IIS representatives. IIS is a part of TimeToAct group. As you know, as most of you might already know, as a certification body, you must be independent from the consulting body. So therefore, we have a separated certification body. This is IIS, which is represented by Francisco Köhler here in this webinar. And of course, we have also Mr. Feldkamp from IAV, the certified company, actually. Me, myself, I'm Simon Becher from TimeToAct Software and Consulting. We help organizations building up their open source compliance program, and of course also helped IAV in the certification process. And that's what we are going to show you right now. On a quick look at the agenda, first we would just give you a brief overview who we are. Then, of course, it's a little bit about ISO 5230. For sure, most of the viewers here of the stream already know ISO 5230 and know the purpose of it. Nevertheless, I just would like to give a very brief overview about it. Then, of course, we will show the steps for the certification. And at the end of the day, also IAV will, of course, give a brief overview of the benefits and what happens after the post-certification. And finally, we have a Q&A session. Nevertheless, I can also only emphasize what Shane already mentioned. Please, in terms of any questions, just jump in, interrupt us. We want to make it, this is an open webinar, so just jump in. First of all, a quick introduction. We have, as said, we have certified IAV, which is represented by Moritz Feldkamp here in this call, and therefore I would like to hand over to Mr. Feldkamp.
Maybe just a very short introduction. My name is Moritz Feldkamp. I'm an assistant to IAV Software Systems and Connectivity Division, and IAV is one of the leading engineering service providers for the automotive industry. It was founded around 40 years ago as a spin-off of the Technical University of Berlin. And actually, this university spirit, you can still feel it today. We have a diverse mix of engineers and computer and natural scientists, around 8,000 employees, about 10% of which are students. So we're working at the interface between science and industry with core competencies in drive development, vehicle development, and smart mobility. So please, are there any questions? As I'd hand over again to Mr. Chucker.
Perfect, thank you very much. And then next, a very brief overview about TimeToAct Group. I don't want to go now into real details, but as you can already see from the naming convention, actually, we are a group. We consist of different daughter companies, and the one important company in this for this webinar is RIS for sure, which is the certification body. Maybe Franziska, you can also introduce yourself quickly and also your profession, of course.
So my name is Franziska Köhler. I work for RIS. I myself am a certified quality manager and auditor. I helped RIS achieve ISO 27001 certification last year. We are certified during a various amount of standards, and RIS itself is a company that does software consulting and software engineering and development, and we have certainly also experience in licensing compliance with a big customer of ours, that is IBM, and their licensing requirements. So it was a natural fit to go with TimeToAct and act as the certification body for the ISO 5230 standard.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Franziska. As TimeToAct, we are a German-based consulting company. Nevertheless, we also do services for our international customers, for instance, in the North American market or in the Asian area. We are not limited to, let's say, compliance consulting, but we also do software engineering and software implementation. But for more information, just feel free to visit our website. And now let's kick off with the auditing process. First, that's more or less an overview about the process which we have done together with IAV. As already mentioned by Mr. Feldkamp, IAV is a leading high-tech service providing industry for the automotive industry with over 7,000 employees worldwide, actually. when we did the project together with IAV, I can also support what Svetlana has already mentioned. Yeah, we can really see the spirit and feel the spirit within IAV, and yeah, really believe that IAV is a highly professional company actually. Nevertheless, of course, as every company, there are also challenges in place, and for IAV, especially in the area of open source compliance, there were these challenges regarding the processes which IAV wanted to improve, and they also want to, of course, improve the trust in the supply chain. Therefore, we from TimeToAct have helped them to obtain the ISO 5230 certification. We have started with a maturity analysis. Then we have derived, based on the maturity analysis, a gap analysis to see where actually the gaps are in between the status quo and the, let's say, the perfect status in the future. Yeah, and as final step, of course, the audit was carried out with the ISO 5230 final certification at the end. In summary, IAV reached a range or a rating of 95%, which is super high actually, and which really also strengthens actually the words from Mr. Feldkamp, that what we have seen is actually that IAV has a very mature compliance organization, yeah, but nevertheless, we also found some gaps, which we then, of course, will mention later. The certification itself was really done in a record time. I think we took nearly 2 months actually for the whole maturity analysis and the final certification process. That's a super quick approach compared to other organizations actually. And of course, we also have some other benefits. We will share the presentation afterwards with you, so you can go actually in the details by yourself. I just would like to show a brief overview about our processes. What is ISO 5230? I think for most of you that should be already known. Yeah, it's the international standard for open source license compliance for the program actually for license compliance. It ensures consistent management of open source, the software program or open source compliance program, and it provides the guidelines for documenting, managing, and using open source software, and of course also distributing open source software for an organization. Now, it's maintained by OpenChain, so we have Shane here as a representative from OpenChain who's maintaining it, and also providing support, of course, and updating that standard. The benefits for certifying for companies. So why should you do actually a certification, whether it's a self-certification or a third-party certification, what we have done now for IAV. Of course, it demonstrates commitments, yeah, with the standard. It will also help you, of course, to reduce the risk associated with non-compliances. It will help you to build trust in the with your clients and with your stakeholders. Of course, one of the main areas is that it will help improve your internal processes in terms of efficiency, and it should also increase your business opportunities and competitive advantages. Now, one of the biggest, let's say, levers and the biggest benefits we have actually experienced, also not only with IAV but also in the process with IAV, it's that it increases the internal awareness for compliance. Yeah. As we have seen before, IAV already had a very high rating and a very high awareness for compliance. Nevertheless, when you have, for instance, new starters in your organizations or people switching roles, the awareness for compliance might not always be that high. Yeah, and this certification process actually will help to increase the awareness. Yeah, so it's like an internal part of the training program. Yeah, and that's one of the main benefits actually we could experience in the certification process. So why makes an external support make sense? Yeah, I mean, you might have often internal resources for auditing or for, let's say, compliance, but nevertheless, third parties can also bring additional benefits to the organization in terms of knowledge. Yeah, I mean, we do not only certify 1 or 2 organizations, we do consulting services and certifications for many organizations. Therefore, we have a broad experience and a broad bandwidth of knowledge, which of course we could bring into the support agreement with you. Yeah. Furthermore, we have also the experts on our side actually who have already carried out those projects. Yeah, and those experience can really help organizations building up their internal compliance program, and of course also help in the certification process. Yeah, so that's why we do believe an external support might make sense. Yeah, does not always make sense. Yeah, it's really depending on your own situation. Yeah, but of course we do bring actually benefits to organizations. Now let's start with the actual process. Let's start with the maturity analysis. That's actually the basis and the start for our support for IAV. Yeah, maturity analysis, it's not a requirement actually when you want to do a self-certification. Yeah, you can also directly engage and kick off with the third-party certification itself. But I would definitely recommend a maturity analysis in advance. It's like it could be considered as an audit light. Yeah, so we follow the general applicable audit techniques. Yeah, and you will get like a gap assessment and improvement steps from us actually, which will definitely help you then in the final audit process. Yeah, the maturity analysis itself actually. So what we will do actually in the analysis, we will evaluate the current status of the open source compliance program, and we will determine your readiness for the final ISO certification. Yeah, we as TimeToAct, we have developed a maturity model which is based on ISO 5230, which then we will walk through with the applicable stakeholders. Yeah, our audit techniques we use are, as said, general applicable audit techniques. Yeah, we will go with interview with key stakeholders. You can see that key is here in brackets because we will not only interview those, let's say, key stakeholders. Key stakeholders would be like the responsible persons for compliance or for open source compliance in an organization. Yeah, that could be, for instance, for each project, one individual, or it could be like one centralized organization within an organization, but that's really dependent on the organization itself. Yeah. Nevertheless, we will also go in interviews with, let's say, further stakeholders, for instance, with the general compliance organization, with purchasing department, with IT controlling might be a relevant stakeholder. Yeah, but that's, as said, this is also super individual based on each organization. Yeah, and in the let's say the kickoff process or in the kickoff presentation, together we will then determine who are actually the stakeholders for your organization. We will analyze the processes which you have in place. Yeah, as you know, ISO 5230 has defined different, let's say, requirements which are typically baked into processes. Yeah, we will walk through with you, with the key stakeholders, through those processes. Yeah, we will not walk through the same process with each individual. It's really depending on the individual we are interviewing and on the, let's say, the role description of the individual. Yeah. And of course, the third big step actually is the documents we will review. Yeah, later on we will see some example documents we will review. But of course, there are some, let's say, required documents, for instance, an open source policy or some open source compliance policy, sorry, and some processes which must be described and which must be documented. And of course, we want to see those documents, those processes, those policies, those binding documents, which we then kindly would ask you to share with us, and we will then review those processes. Based on all those, let's say, individual steps, those interviews, those analysis, we will then identify the gaps and those areas where we see the need for enhancement, yeah, in order to be able to certify for ISO 5230. Based on actually our the audit techniques, the outcome is, let's say, an overview diagram, which we have, which is derived from ISO 5230, which shows the maturity level based on each area. Yeah, those are the areas which have been defined in the standard itself. Yeah, and here we can then see actually the rating for an organization depending on each individual area. Right. What we will also do actually, we will benchmark your rating compared to other organizations. Here we can just see two organizations for which we have also done consulting services. which were, let's say, on the beginning of their road to open source compliance. Yeah, and that was their maturity level at the beginning. Yeah, as you can see, if you compare it to the maturity level for a very mature organization in this case, to those here which were not super mature or actually not mature at all, yeah, we can see that there is a lot of room for enhancements. Yeah, but nevertheless, it might be also interesting for you how you rate compared to your peer groups. Yeah. What kind of documents we typically review? Yeah, please keep in mind those are just examples. Yeah, the actual documents we will then receive and review might differ. Also, the description of the documents might differ. Yeah. For instance, there might be organizations which do not really have an own policy for open source compliance. It's part of another binding document. That might also be absolutely the case and can be absolutely valid. Yeah. Nevertheless, what we definitely need to see actually are those binding documents showing the overall governance for open source software, compliance for open source software. We also need to see some kind of roles and responsibilities. Then, for instance, some descriptions for competencies for each roles, competencies for the program participants. Also, it's described in the ISO standard is the evidence of the competences. So how actually can you verify that a person or a role actually has the necessary competences? Yeah, and what is the evidence for that? Those are typically questions and typically documents we want to see from you. As a next step, after the maturity analysis, we will have the gap analysis. Yeah, in the gap analysis itself, I will just jump to the next slide here. In the gap analysis, we will have we will see individual, let's say, individual requirements of the maturity of the ISO standard based on each area where we would think you need improve actually and how you can close the gaps. Yeah, we provide you an action plan how those gaps can be closed actually. Yeah. Furthermore, we will also help you actually in closing those gaps. Yeah, if that is requested from your side, of course. Yeah, and at the end of the day, what we recommend is that you achieve 80% in our maturity level to be able to obtain the certification. Yeah. A rating of 80% does not necessarily mean that you will have a guarantee that you will get the certification. This lies then in the hands of the auditor at the end of the day. But nevertheless, we do recommend a rating of 80%, and we believe 80% is sufficient for the final certification. All right, as said already, we have the gap analysis based on the different maturity categories, which you can also find in the ISO standard itself. Yeah, I will just jump here right away to the next slide, because here we can really see how actually a gap analysis will look like. Yeah, you will get this catalog from us, where we can really see the domain or the different areas actually of the gaps where they are identified. We will always give you the reference to the actual requirement in the ISO standard. Yeah, we will give you the observation. Yeah, so our observation, what we have seen compared to what we actually would expect. And of course, you would also get a recommendation. What we can see here, that's actually a recommendation we have provided for IAV. Of course, it's anonymized for the observation as the recommendation due to data protection. Yeah. That's typically a measure catalog which you will get from us, and then on, let's say, ongoing steps, we will then help you to close those gaps, and we will measure actually also the gaps closing. Yeah, and when you have implemented our recommendations, we would then say you're actually ready for the final audit and for the final ISO 5230 audit from RS, which will then be the next step. And here I would like to hand over to Franziska to show actually the actual audit process.
Okay. Thank you very much. Why should you have third-party certification bodies? Because we are totally independent from what TimeToAct did with Simon in the gap closing and the maturity analysis. We look at all the provided documents freshly and with new eyes and with unbiased and objective assessments. That was our role as a third-party auditor. And if you can go to the next slide, please. how would a certification process look like? What we did was we have an initial meeting, get to know each other with the body that seeks certification, where we discuss an initial timeline. If they are with EFL, we were really had time constraints, so we had to move fast and provide the certification rather quickly. Then I handed them a documentation request. This is derived from the standard itself, a list of required documents and a submission deadline, so I can review them on my own. In my own time, we set a deadline, and then I had 1 week for review before the final audit started. What we did with the audits is I had a very long, a days-long audit with the compliance team and some representatives from management of EFL, because I think management buy-in is for once required by the standard in a very indirect manner, but it is required. And then with the compliance team and with a team that is responsible for all the processes. And then what we did with EFL was we had 10 development teams. So we had 10 one-hour audits spaced out over a week and a half, where I asked more technical questions, where of course looked for, do the participants really know what is in the policy? Do they live the policy? How do they act in their everyday doing? And I had an interview guideline and I took notes. And afterwards, because we were on a strict timeline, I finalized my audit findings in about 2 days. Normally I would take a week or so, but it can move faster. And I summarized my findings, and if there had been any non-compliance issues, I would have addressed them here. And there are possibilities, if they are minor non-compliance issues, to give the body that seeks certification a gap closing time, and then they are certified. Or if there would be major non-compliance issues, then the certification, of course, would fail. But we had nothing of that sort with EFL. And then a final certification is issued, and the report is sent with the certification to the body that seeks certification. And we had a final presentation. And yeah, that was part of my work. And if you can move to the next. Yeah, my findings were that EFL has a very, very, very high compliance level. What I was very impressed by was the high documentation standards. That was not just for the documents provided for ISO 5230 standard, but what I could see generally, how EFL works with documentation, how they review documents, how they make sure the involved parties are notified if any changes are made on the documents. Then there was strong management support, not only for the open source program office, but generally from higher up, even starting from the CEO down. Then the engagement and expertise I found in every development team interview was just amazing. I was really, really impressed by the technical expertise, by the expertise, by the understanding what open source means, what the benefits, but also what the risks are for using open source software, and what the licensing compliance means. And because I had a question, how you ensure that people are actually qualified, how you provide proof of that. It's practically training. So, and EFL has a very mature training concept where people who want to engage and provide or use open source software have to run through a training course where they get a certificate in the end, and they have to do that before they are allowed to participate and use open source software. So that was my overall findings I was very impressed by. And so it was a given that EFL should receive the certification. And that was it for my part. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Franziska. Right. So all in all, I would say that the project with EFL for us as a service provider was, I would say, quite satisfying due to the very high standards and the very high rating which was already present at EFL. So yeah, I think it was quite easy, let's say, to provide our support for them and also provide the final certification. So this is very satisfying from a service provider perspective. Now, just let's give you an overview. What is the ongoing support and what needs to be done ongoing? So as you might already know, that to be able to keep the certification for ISO 5230, there needs to be an annual surveillance audit actually. So a surveillance audit, it's more like a small audit. Of course, there's very limited scope and there's very limited engagement from all sides. Yeah. And of course, every 3 years, a more or less full comprehensive audit needs to take place. Yeah. And after that comprehensive recertification, actually, the annual surveillance audit will come up for the next 2 years again. Right. Now, I would like to hand over to Mr. Feldkamp from IAV to show actually the post-certification, the potential and the rewards.
Yeah, actually, it should be unleashing, not unleasing. But what we hope to derive from this certification is that we can show that we can do open source, that we are better than competition, and with the implementation of functional risk management, we'd like to realize efficiency gains and hope that with open source will act as an innovation driver for us. And definitely, and we have not listed this here, we hope that we also participate from the added or deepened trust on customer side. Definitely that this external certification is giving us. Mr. Platschaka.
Yeah.
For the open source program office, this comprises actually 5 important topics for us. Basically, everything that is required by the ISO standard. So we have an internal focal point with this open source program office for all OSS issues. We have centralized control of QA activities, and we have an internal and external representation of OS at IAV, which eases internal as well as external collaboration. So, summing up the benefits from using open source and contributing to the community, is we think that innovation can happen much faster if we don't start from scratch and build on the great things open source software has to offer. We are ready to give and already gave important contributions to open source and GitHub, etc. So actually, yeah, we're happy we could finish this certification. It's a process ongoing. Could finish it actually within this very short time frame, and we're now better part of the community.
Very good. Thank you very much. And basically, that's it from our side. at this stage, I would like to thank again to IAV and also, of course, to OpenChain to provide us the community, and also to IAV to participate with us in this webinar. And of course, also thanks very much for the great project actually we have been carried out. Right. Are there any questions?
There are indeed. First of all, thank you so much for the excellent overview. And we have a couple of questions in. Jari has two. The first is, now that IAV has obtained ISO 5230 conformance, is there a plan to get ISO 18974 too? Just so people know on the call, 5230 is the standard for open source license compliance. 18974 is a sister standard for security assurance.
So actually, we're contemplating this, but there are no concrete steps into this direction.
And there's a second question by Jari, which is interesting. You know, the evidence of competence for a role. How was that analyzed in this case? And there's a lot of answers to how we analyze competence. So Jari, I guess, is curious in this situation, how is that approached? Because, you know, in our case studies, we only have a few examples of how people go about this, and each new one is very interesting.
Absolutely. So, as we all know, yeah, in the standard itself, it's always, there's only described the requirement itself, but it's never described how actually to achieve it. I mean, of course, there are examples, yeah, but it's never really a clear requirement on how to achieve it. Yeah, and as you said, Shane, I mean, there are a lot of different ways how to achieve actually the competences. As Franziska, I think you mentioned it already before, IAV has a very extensive training program. Yeah, and after a training program, actually, there were individual tests which need to be conducted by each training participant. Yeah, and for instance, the results of those tests could be the verification for the competences for the role. That could be one example. Of course, there is also something like a role description and some requirements coming along with each role, right? Which describes the competences which each participant of the program must have actually, and also this role description and the let's say the proven verification of the knowledge of the individual person could also be an evidence actually for that. But as Shane, as you already said, there are a lot of different answers for that. Yeah, those are just two which we commonly see, and also at IAV we have seen so far.
Yes, indeed. I mean, one of our key things has always been to clearly separate the approach OpenChain does with the identification of process points versus individual corporate choices about how processes are filled out. And that's very important. I mean, we're not an implementation standard, we're a structural standard, and then people choose the implementation details. But there's always a huge demand for examples, and people do love to have an example in play.
Absolutely.
The next question relates to something that I actually just had a call before this webinar on. Capability maturity modeling is becoming more and more common around open source as a whole. And during this presentation and case study, Simon flagged that one of the starting points was to identify the sort of capabilities or maturity of a company approaching open source, approaching this situation. And as it happened, IAV has a very high level of maturity in this domain. Just out of curiosity, has maturity modeling been something in play for either TimeToAct or IAV? Is it something that's standard for your company or not? And I'm asking that because, you know, some third-party providers are building capability maturity models around open source, including our ISO standards. Some user companies are including our ISO standards into their general approach to maturity modeling. For instance, you know, Toyota with their Kaizen approach. And some parties are not. They are not using maturity modeling. Instead, they're finding a process that takes them to production. They're not using capability maturity modeling as their deployment approach. And just out of curiosity, is capability maturity modeling something that's in play for either of you or not? And is it something that is of interest to you or not? And this is sort of a leading question because our education group is considering whether we publish reference material in this domain or not and how we do that.
Mm-hmm. So maybe I can just answer it for TimeToAct actually. So as we are also part of the ISO organization, or let's say not TimeToAct itself, but employees of TimeToAct are part of the ISO organization and are also writing actually active on standards. We are very close to those kind of let's say standards itself. Yeah. Therefore, we do like actually maturity models, and we have developed several maturity models based on for let's say other business areas and business domains. Yeah, for instance, we also have created a maturity model for ISO standard 19770, which is the standard for IT asset management. Yeah. Therefore, we have more or less used our already existent capability model and just adapted it to ISO 5230. Yeah. Nevertheless, I just want to point out a little bit why we do like those kind of maturity models, because it really gives an organization the status quo, yeah? And you can achieve it very fast actually. And if you rely on, if you build your maturity model based on a specific ISO standard, for instance, give you some kind of objectivity and some kind of, let's say, basis on which you can build up your maturity level. Yeah. And as said, for an organization, it's quite nice to see the status quo based on an objectified model. And that's why we really like this kind of models and this process. So for TimeToAct, to answer the question, this is nothing new. Yeah. And we do really like to do this kind of maturity assessments.
Yeah, answering for IAV, actually, for us too, this is not new. We had the possibility for this for this assessment and certification to build on a very strong compliance system that was established after the diesel scandal shook the German automotive industry. And part of this very strong compliance system are also software development maturity models in processes. Yes. Shane?
Absolutely. No, it was very interesting to hear that, because what we're doing is we're looking at releasing some public domain material to give examples of capability maturity modeling. And we've noticed something similar to what you just mentioned, that companies like IAV tend to have things like this in place, especially in the last decade. It's become more and more common. And then we have companies in other spaces, let's say embedded consumer electronics, that might not at all have used this in the past. They've got very rapid time to market and very short lifespan of products and very, very low resources and profitability. So what we're going to be doing is we'll be releasing some public domain examples of approaches to maturity modeling, but incomplete. Let's be frank. It's not our job as a standards org to help people with maturity modeling, but it is our habit to, for instance, show people example training material, give people example policy templates, and we'll be including capability maturity modeling as a little example spreadsheet with some items filled out. Yeah, I think that's all our questions for now. And I trust that as this recording is propagated as it goes out, we may be able to swing back to you and perhaps send in some questions over time. One thing I wanted to flag, if you or any of our audience is interested, the OpenChain Automotive Work Group is looking at having a little event in Stuttgart on the 10th of September. So this event is something that we've just been pulling together with our little community. And I will, for the sake of completeness, of course, share access to the web page for that. What I'll do is I'll just actually share the web page itself, but in the chat put the link. And we expect to launch the registration for this in the next week or so. And there's pre-registration by email at the moment. The automotive work group is essentially user companies, so it's an awful lot of the manufacturers at the end points like BMW, CARIAD, Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and so on, but also major tier ones such as Bosch and Hitachi and Panasonic. Informal though, we get together and chat. But Stuttgart will be an interesting one where we're beginning to put together a preliminary agenda, which is running from 1 p.m. until 6 and talking about everything from our ISO standards to pretty technical things, software-defined vehicles, and then into specific projects and whatnot. But also a chance for networking, just flagging that so people can be aware. And naturally, if someone wants to turn up and talk about third-party certification, the floor is yours. Right. What can I say but thank you to everyone who came along to present. Thank you to the audience who is here and to those watching more distantly on streaming to China, and for those watching in other languages. If you do have questions, we're perfectly capable of taking notes, questions, and comments in, of course, simplified or traditional Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and so on. Thank you. And I do hope to communicate with you all very shortly. And I deeply appreciate this chance to have a webinar and case study. It's invaluable and will be promoted extensively throughout our community in the weeks and months to come.
Shane, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.